I had a few thoughts I wanted to share. One thing I wanted to share, if people haven't read this, I know I've posted this in some emails, but I don't know how many people have had a chance to look at this. There's a really excellent report, a study put out by the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C., called America is Not Broke. And it's got some really important messages that I think we need to hear, because we keep on hearing over and over again from elected officials, including Barack Obama and our Democrats in Congress, that we're broke and we can't afford these things. That's just plain wrong. America is not broke. We're a very rich country. The problem is that much of our riches are just sitting there in the hands of people who have more money than they know what to do with and are just sitting on it. And that's leaving the economy stagnant. We've got other problems. Our perpetual wars are a problem. They make us weak and they make us lacking the wherewithal to spend on other things. That's a problem. And we have problems in terms of the sustainability of our energy economy. We need to convert our economy to something that really actually works for the future for our kids, grandkids, and their grandkids. There's lots of things that are not working the best in our country. That said, America is not broke financially. We just need to redirect things. And by the way, if you want to find this report, Institute for Policy Studies website is IPS-DC. So I'd encourage people to go to that website, IPS-DC, and look for America is Not Broke. And you'll find lots of really excellent information there. A couple of the things I wanted to point out, they have essentially three parts to what they're raising here. And one part we've been talking about earlier is the idea of instituting fair taxes so that everybody's paying their fair share and those who can afford it are paying their fair share. And the Institute for Policy Studies has come up with ways to raise revenue in terms of taxation, the sorts of things I was talking about earlier. Things like letting the Bush-era tax cuts expire, instituting higher income tax brackets on the real high-end earners, things along the lines of a transactions tax on financial transactions. They have several other things. They estimate that $375 billion per year could be netted through these kinds of tax reforms, ending some of the loopholes in corporate taxation and whatnot. Well, over a decade, we've been talking about a decade, when the super committee was talking about cutting the projected deficits over the next decade, they were looking for $1.2 trillion in savings over a decade. Well, that's $120 billion per year on average. They're talking about $375 billion per year, so more than 3 times what the super committee was essentially tasked with finding in the way of deficit reduction. They are proposing we get by taxing those who can well afford it. That makes a lot of sense to me, but that's only one part of their pie. They also have on here cutting military spending, and they estimate per year we could save $252 billion cutting military spending and still have by far the best funded and most well-equipped and capable military in the world. $252 billion a year, that's $2.5 trillion over a decade. It is a lot of money, but it's less than 1/3 of what we're spending on the military, for God's sakes. It's essentially talking about cutting these expenditures that we don't need to be making. We don't need bases on every continent on this planet. It just doesn't make sense to try to do that. We don't have national security interests in every place where we have our military based, and we certainly don't need every weapon system that the military contractors bring out there and say, buy this to us, and we don't need to privatize and keep on taking all of this money and turning it over to companies like Halliburton, to Kellogg Brown and Root, to Z, or whatever the folks are calling themselves this year. These various military contractors, they are so many of them, and they're all extremely profitable. Many of them are getting no-bid contracts. It just makes no sense. So we can cut a lot of that wasteful military spending and put ourselves in much better financial shape. There's also another piece to this pie. They're talking about $197 billion, just under $200 billion a year, that could be netted by taxing pollution and ending subsidies to polluters. And this makes a lot of sense. If we want a cleaner, greener future, a future that works, there's no point in subsidizing dirty energy. We don't need to subsidize oil. We don't need to subsidize coal. We don't need to subsidize these wasteful forms of energy production. We certainly don't need to subsidize nuclear power. This is a 60-year-old industry that has never been able to work out financially, that's only operated because they've had the government underpinning them at every step in the process. And I'm talking about everything from the notion of not paying their own liability insurance, having Price Anderson covering them, to the idea that there are all kinds of production subsidies, all sorts of subsidies that are unnecessary and uncalled for. And now they want loan guarantees on every plant they're going to build. It makes absolutely no sense. And we could save literally $200 billion a year taxing pollution and ending subsidies to dirty energy, and we'd be much better off. We'd be building windmills at a rapid clip. We'd be actually competing with China and Germany for who's going to be in first place with renewable energy rather than falling to the back of the pack. And that makes a lot of sense if we want a future that works, because we know with climate change being a very real threat, we know with non-renewable resources being non-renewable, and they're going to get more scarce and they're going to run out and they're going to cost more to produce before they run out. It just doesn't make sense to keep on putting our eggs in that basket. So here we are, we're saying to our government, we're saying to our fellow citizens, we're saying to whoever will listen to us, now's the time to be recognizing that we're not broke, that we have a workable future, but that future needs to be enacted by us. And we need to insist that people who are in the position to make these choices listen to these voices of reason. These voices of reason are people like the Progressive Caucus in Congress that came out with a budget for everyone. I encourage everyone to read that. It just makes a heck of a lot of sense. And it's just really sad that so many people are caught in a very narrow bind of thinking in budgetary terms. Well, we can't afford this deficit, we're going to leave all this debt to our children, that's not fair, so we got to cut everything. Well, no, we don't have to cut everything. We have to cut the things that are not productive. Massive military spending is not productive, particularly when there's no significant threat to our security from the outside. There's lots of threats to our security, but they come from the fact that we're hollowing out our inside. They come from the fact that our economy is dysfunctional and we're not moving in the right direction. They come from the fact we're dependent on non-renewable energy sources. There's lots of things that are threatening to us, but they're not going to be addressed by putting bases all around the world and stationing troops and our navies and our air forces and on every continent, on every ocean, and in the skies over everywhere. That doesn't make us more secure. It's key for us to recognize that. It's key for us to share that message with our fellow citizens. That our country is not broke. That our country has a strong and bright future if we make the right choices. And we're here today to say, let's make those right choices. Let's get smart. Let's get aware. And let's make a difference.
Yes.
Yeah.